Hi, fellow geochemists and geochemistry enthusiasts. Welcome to Geochemist Tea, the only podcast for people who love geochemistry with a side of tea. This is a short episode that we're releasing ahead of our episode with Pim van Geffen on August 11th. This short is a perfect standalone episode where Pim reviews the basic facts about common digest and analytical methods that are not commonly known outside our field of geochemistry.
I think you made a really great point about requirements for analysis. So this we're talking about, digest and finishes. Can you talk about a little bit right now in terms of what you mean exactly in terms of requirements for analysis?
I think this is probably the most important thing that you can learn as a starting geochemist. If you want to differentiate yourself, right, from the geologist in general, the general geologist, the very most important thing that you must understand and learn before you can really call yourself a geochemist is the different digests and analytical techniques that provide your data. So understanding, how the data are generated. And that fundamental bit, there's actually in the commercial space, there's not a whole lot. There's like 4 or 5 different digest types. There are like 3 common ones. And there's 4 or 5 analytical finish types, right? So it's not, there's actually not a whole lot you need to know, but it's so fundamental to working with any data that, most geologists just don't get the exposure to it unless they're really keen. Or if they just get put in the position to interact with labs and really understand how labs work and how labs generate your data, right? So in a commercial setting, you rely on commercial labs, so you're not doing the lab work yourself anymore. So you have to rely on the commercial, lab to do what it is they do, but you have to really understand what they do, and it's critical. So if you have an Acarija digest, most people think that's a strong acid, and it is a strong acid. The reason people use Acarija is because it dissolves a good chunk of your sample, usually less than half though, but it also keeps gold in solution. And this is why explorationists like it, because if you have soils that have any kind of gold in them, then the Acarija will make sure that it's captured and put into solution. So then you always measure the solution, right? Not the residue. So whatever goes in solution is what you get measured. Now, but Acarija is by no means a total method for silicates. So to get silicates into solution, you either have to add an acid like hydrofluoric acid, which breaks down the silica bonds, which then also evaporates the silicon, right? So silicon tetrafluoride is actually then evaporated in the process, so you don't get a silica number because your silicon does not go into solution. It's evaporated. So it's a compromise, but at least a 4-acid digest will get most of your material into solution. There's a couple of really strong oxides that don't, and as I mentioned, like the volatilization of some elements and compounds is also a problem. But it's sort of a best compromise. So it's relatively cheap compared to doing a whole rock characterization. So whole rock data, most of your textbook diagrams will be based on whole rock data. What does whole rock mean? Well, some people think that whole rock means just one total method, but generally when we talk about whole rock data, we talk about total characterization. And when you go to any lab, there's no one method that does total characterization. It's usually a combination of 3, 4, or 5 different lab methods to fully characterize your material, right? So there's no one technique that fully characterizes everything in your sample. So usually it's a combination of a 4-acid digest to describe, most of the trace elements in your silicates. Sometimes it's complemented with Acarrhea digest because you dissolve less of your sample, you could actually get better detection limits for the elements that do dissolve. And then there's a fusion, so lithium metaborate fusion, for instance, where the silica bonds are broken down to get the major element oxides all measured. In the past, it was also done using XRF, so lab-based XRF, which didn't get the very light elements, but still the major element oxides would still be captured quite well. So it's a combination of those methods, and then you can add things like carbon and sulfur speciation, carbonated carbon, graphite, organic carbon, sulfide and sulfate, sulfur. So there are these packages that do, whole characterization, and a lot of the textbook diagrams rely on total digest data. So even a 4-acid digest is not always total. For something like zirconium, yeah, it gets a good chunk. And then, from lab to lab, it differs too. So it's also important that you understand how well does the lab do your work. So this is where QA/QC comes in. And as a geochemist, again, if you want to set yourself apart, understanding quality assurance and quality control, and understanding how you use that effectively to understand the limitations of your lab data is essential. I would actually recommend go to the major labs, or their websites, download their brochures, and they all have brochures with geochemical methods, and they describe in the fine print exactly what they do. So it's if you do that, if you want to distinguish yourself as a geochemist, just understand lab methods. It's the foundation of everything we do.